Now we need to create our values.yaml for the load balancer controller. That one will put it under a subfolder, LB controller, and then inside here we'll just create a values.yaml. This values.yaml can be found on the chat repository of the load balancer controller, which can be referenced in this link right here. So this file will also be shared in the video description so that you can just take it, modify it, and use it on your end. For now, some values will use placeholders until we apply our resources. Then we'll come back and update these Helm values. So the first value will be the replica count, which will set it to 2. And the revision limit will use the default, which is 10. Then I will pass in the image from the public ECR repository. Then I will also pass in the auto scaling block. Make sure you indent this correctly. For the service account, we'll be creating it through the Helm chat. And then I will be passing in our own annotations. And the annotation we'll be using will be the role ARN of the load balancer controller role ARN. For now, we'll leave this value as empty until we apply our resources, and then we can get the role ARN from the outputs. I just remembered we skipped populating the outputs for the main module. We'll do that in a bit. We have the name. We'll also pass this after we apply our resources. And then we have the following, which are just default values from the chart. I will be passing in the cluster name, which we will know after we apply our resources also. For now, we pass in an empty string. Then we'll indicate whether we are creating the ingress class resource. We'll set it to true, which is the default. Then we'll need the region. The region doesn't change, so we can just pass it in, US West. 2, make sure you pass in your region. This region needs to correspond to the region that you specified under this variable in the root folder's variables.tf file. This is the region value that you need to pass here. Lastly, we need the VPC ID, which we'll know after the resource is created. So for now, we'll just use an empty string. Next, we need actually to define the outputs that we'll be getting from this module. And for that, open the outputs.tf file in the root folder. The first output is the cluster name. Pass it like this. And then for the values, it will be AWS coming from the module. And then we'll just say name. Then we need to get our OIDC provider URL. We'll need it for a manual step later on. For this, we can output it using this name, EKS identity. And then the value of this output will be a map with 2 values. The full ID, which will come from the EKS cluster identity, and the ID itself, which is going to be extracted in the locals.tf file. So when you open the locals.tf, you'll notice here we were going through these 2 steps in order to get the OIDC ID so that we can pass it here like this. So the first variable reads the issuer the way we are reading it from the identity, but here now we are outputting the entire identity. Within the locals, you have to dive into the identity and then look for the OIDC identity and then look for the issuer. For this, if we had more than one identity, you'll have to use Terraform functions to obtain the OIDC provider. And if you had more than one OIDC provider, you'll also change this logic right here. For this tutorial, so we are using the single identity provider that comes created with the EKS cluster. Then we need to output the load balancer controller role ARN to use EKS LB controller role. The value will come from the load balancer role resource.name, which we are going to create in a bit. We'll also have the ARN that will come from the same resource. We'll also need the VPC ID from module VPC ID, and then we have the AWS region from the variable AWS region. So we need to create the load balancer controller role in the main.tf before we can proceed. The role will be created in its separate block. So open the main.tf in the root folder, and then after the Terraform data resource, we'll just have the load balancer controller role. For this role, we had created the policy documents. So it's just a matter of initializing the role and attaching the policy. So to do that, we start with the policy resource, which will be using this resource type, and then it will be named load balancer controller IAM policy. We'll give our policy a name of var.name. This is the project name, and we'll just append LB controller policy. For the path, pass in the default role path. For the description, you can add your creative description here. For me, I'll just say LB controller policy. For this is the description I'll use. And then for the policy, we need to pass in the policy document data.aws IAM policy document.lbcontroller.json. Next, we're going to create the policy attachment. But before we do the policy attachment, we'll do the IAM role first so that we have something that we are attaching the policy to. So we'll create the IAM role and we'll just call it LB controller role. The name of the role will be similar to the policy. And then we'll pass in the assume role policy, which expects a JSON that will come from data.aws IAM policy document.lb trust policy.json. So once we attach the trust policy to the role, we can now create the role attachment resource to attach the policy to our role. For this one, we'll use the AWS IAM role policy attachment. So let's just name it LB role policy attachment. Here we pass in the role, which will be this resource here, name. The policy, we pass in the policy ARN, which will be this policy at the top here, .ARN. So we need to validate our setup now.